Jackson Hayes was more than just a name on a billboard. He was the soul of country music, a kid from nowhere who wrote ballads that made grown men cry and teenage girls fall in love with heartbreak. Nashville worshipped him. Radio DJs lived for the exclusive tracks he'd drop in the middle of the night, and the world watched him walk red carpets like a sun-kissed cowboy who never let fame polish the dirt from his boots. But long before the platinum records and sold-out tours, there was Willow Creek. It was a town the size of a half-forgotten dream, nestled between cornfields and quiet roads that curled like roots around every story ever whispered at the local diner. Willow Creek was where Jackson learned his first chords on an old Gibson passed down from his granddad. It was where he'd stand under the single street lamp, strumming his heart out, pretending the crickets were a cheering crowd. No matter how far he roamed, every note he sang tasted faintly of this place. Back in town, Emily Carter had her own secret rhythm. She'd been 17 when Jackson Hayes left for Nashville with nothing but a guitar case and a promise he'd be back one day. She believed him, even when her friends called her naive. Now 26, she still carried that same hope tucked under her ribs like an old love letter she never sent. Emily wasn't just another fan. She was the girl who'd waited tables at the Creekside Diner every summer, wiping down sticky counters while Jackson's songs played on the tinny radio in the kitchen. She'd hum along, swirl leftover coffee in chipped mugs, and picture what she'd say if she ever saw him again. Most days, she'd press a hand to her chest when his voice drifted through the speakers, the raw twang of his guitar strings threading through her veins like warm honey. And on her loneliest nights, she'd stare up at the ceiling in her childhood bedroom. The poster of Jackson above her bed creased and faded, the edges curling like a well-loved secret. So when word spread like wildfire that Jackson Hayes was coming back, just for one night, Emily felt her heart jolt awake. She first heard it from Beth, her best friend since grade school. They were stocking condiments at the diner when Beth leaned in close, whispering like they were 16 again, swapping crushes in the back booth. "Em, you hear? Jackson's doing a secret show. Tomorrow night. Town Hall. Invitation only." Emily nearly dropped a stack of napkins in her hands. "You're kidding." "Here." "Why?" Beth laughed. "Why not? It's Jackson Hayes. He can do whatever he wants." The next 24 hours spun by in a haze. Emily spent her entire week's tips on a third-row ticket. Her mama teased her, saying she'd never grow up, still pining for that boy who once mowed lawns to afford his first guitar strings. But Emily didn't care. Something deep inside told her this wasn't just a concert, it was a sign. The town might never change, but maybe she could. Maybe he could. When the night came, Willow Creek turned out like it was the 4th of July, and Christmas rolled into one. Trucks lined the fields around the old town hall. Strings of lights hung from the trees, casting golden halos over couples slow dancing to Jackson's songs played through battered speakers. Emily took her place in the third row. She'd curled her hair, slipped into a white cotton dress that fluttered around her knees like it had been stitched from every daydream she'd ever had of him. Her sandals were dusty from the gravel lot, her hands trembling just enough to make her clutch her purse tight against her lap. She could feel the energy in the air, sticky sweet, like honey melting on a hot biscuit. The crowd buzzed with whispered gossip. Some said Jackson was scouting for new talent. Others claimed he'd come home for good. Emily didn't care about rumors. She just wanted one moment, one glance, one memory to tuck away for the nights when Willow Creek felt too small for her dreams. The lights dimmed. A hush fell like a blanket over the chatter. Then a single spotlight cut through the shadows, and there he was, Jackson Hayes, larger than life and exactly as she remembered him. Worn boots scuffed from the road, jeans hugging lean hips, a a weather hat tipped low over eyes that seemed to hold every song ever sung under a Tennessee sky. He strummed the first chord of Backroads and Promises, and Emily felt her chest tighten. It was the song she'd played on repeat until her CD skipped, the song that made her believe she could be more than just a diner waitress with dreams too big for her apron pocket. Jackson's voice drifted over the crowd, raw and soft, a promise wrapped in music. And then something shifted. Emily saw his gaze sweep the rows like he was searching for something he'd lost a long time ago. And then, God help her, he found her. Their eyes locked. For one breathless second, the entire town vanished. It was just him, just her, and the echo of his voice wrapping around her like a secret. Her heart raced. She mouthed the words to his song, every syllable stitched into her bones. Jackson's smile flickered, small but real. He tilted his head like he was memorizing her face, like he'd known her all along. Emily felt her pulse hammer in her throat. Was he really looking at her? Or was it her imagination spinning out wild dreams under the soft glow of the stage lights? But then he did it again, and again. Every time his eyes wandered back to her, she felt the world tilt, her heart daring to believe that sometimes, maybe, fairy tales did start under cheap string lights in a town that smelled like cornfields and dust. When the final chord rang out, and Jackson tipped his hat to the cheering crowd, Emily's soul ached with a question she couldn't yet put into words. She lingered in her seat as people gathered their jackets and spilled into the warm night. Her friends waved, calling her to join them for a drink at the tavern, but Emily couldn't move. She sat there, third row, fingertips grazing the edge of the stage, as if she could soak up the last bits of magic still lingering in the wood. Somewhere deep down, she whispered a wish into the night air. Just one chance, please. Just one chance to know if he remembers what it's like to come from here, to see me. She didn't know then that behind the curtains, Jackson Hayes was asking his manager for her name, and he wouldn't forget it. Emily didn't remember much of the walk back to her little blue hatchback in the gravel lot behind the town hall. Her feet moved on autopilot, mind replaying that moment on a loop, his eyes, the smile that tugged at the corner of his lips, the way the last note of Backroads and Promises seemed to hang in the air just for her. Her phone buzzed in her purse. It was Beth. "So, did you melt?" the text read. Emily laughed under her breath. Melt didn't even begin to cover it. She fumbled for her keys, slipped inside the car, and sat there with the engine off, the heat of the day still radiating from the seats. She could hear the buzz of crickets outside, the distant hum of people leaving in trucks, laughing, shouting goodbyes into the night. For them, it was just a good show, something to gossip about tomorrow at the diner over pancakes and refills of bad coffee. But for Emily, it felt like the beginning of something she couldn't name yet. Back at home, she brushed her teeth while staring at her reflection in the tiny bathroom mirror. Her cheeks were still flushed, her eyes bright and unfocused. She wondered if he'd really seen her, or if she'd spun the whole thing up in her lovesick mind. She padded to her bedroom and stood in front of the old poster on her wall, the same one that had hung there since she was 17. Jackson at 19, guitar slung over his back, grin wide and full of dreams that hadn't yet been tested by the world. She touched her fingertips to the corner of the poster. "Crazy, right?" she whispered to him like he could hear. "It's me. You saw me tonight." She flopped onto her bed, the sheets cool against her sun-warmed skin. Sleep found her only after she'd played that moment over and over, until her heart finally settled into a softer rhythm. The next morning at the diner, the place was buzzing with more energy than it had seen in years. Farmers in dusty boots, kids in ripped jeans, older couples in Sunday best, even though it was only Friday. Everyone had a story about the show. Beth leaned across the counter, her eyes dancing with mischief. "You were in your own world last night," she teased, stirring her coffee like she was conducting an orchestra. Emily ducked her head, scrubbing at a stubborn stain on a table. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, please." Beth lowered her voice. "I swear he looked at you. Twice. Maybe more. Once, maybe," Emily said, but her lips curled into a traitorous smile. Beth wiggled her eyebrows. "Girl, you've been waiting for a sign since you were old enough to scribble Mrs. Jackson Hayes in your diary." Emily tossed a rag at her. "Shut up." The little bell above the door jingled as a few more regulars came in. Emily slipped behind the counter, tying her apron tighter around her waist. She told herself not to think about him, not to imagine him strumming that guitar in some hotel room right now, miles away from Willow Creek. She was pouring fresh coffee for old Mrs. Granger when the front door swung open again, this time with a heavy thud that rattled the bell. A man in black sunglasses and a baseball cap stood in the doorway, scanning the room. He looked more out of place than a horse in a city alley. He spotted her immediately. "Emily Carter?" he asked, his voice rough but polite. She blinked. "Yes." He pulled off the sunglasses, tucked them into his shirt pocket, and held up a small laminated card. "Jackson Hayes Backstage Access, VIP." Emily's jaw dropped. The diner seemed to hush around her. "Mr. Hayes would like to see you," the man said. "He asked if you'd come by the hall." Now, Beth dropped a coffee cup, which hit the counter with a clatter, but miraculously didn't break. Emily's hands flew to her apron ties. "Wait, what?" "Me." The man nodded once. "You." She felt everyone's eyes on her as she untied her apron, grabbed her purse, and stumbled out from behind the counter. Beth mouthed go, and gave her a shove toward the door. Outside, the late morning sun was so bright it made her eyes water. She climbed into the black SUV parked at the curb, heart hammering against her ribs like it wanted to break free. Inside, the car smelled like leather and new cologne. She fidgeted with the strap of her purse, rehearsing what she'd say. "Hi, Jackson. Remember me? The girl who stares at you like a schoolgirl every time you open your mouth." But when they pulled up behind the town hall, she was too busy counting her breaths to form any words at all. The backstage door creaked open. She stepped into a dim hallway lined with battered guitars and cases and crates of equipment that looked older than she was. Someone's laughter echoed down the hall, deep, easy, unmistakable. She peeked around the corner, and there he was, Jackson Hayes, sitting on a battered old stool, acoustic guitar resting on his knee like it belonged there more than anywhere else in the world. He glanced up as the door clicked shut behind her, and then he smiled. "Emily Carter," he drawled, his voice softer than a velvet night. "I was hoping you'd come." She stood frozen, her pulse roaring in her ears. "Hi. Why me?" Jackson's grin widened. "'Cause you were the only person out there who sang every word like they still mattered." He set the guitar down and walked toward her, boots scuffing the wooden floor. Up close, he smelled like cedar and the warm tang of sweat after a good show. His hair stuck out in damp curls beneath his hat. There were lines around his eyes now, deeper than the boy in her poster, but they made him real, tangible in a way that made her heart ache. "You were incredible last night," she blurted out. He chuckled, looking down for a moment before meeting her gaze again. "You were pretty incredible, too. Didn't even flinch when I kept looking at you." Emily's cheeks burned. You noticed." "I couldn't help it," Jackson said. He gestured to a faded couch in the corner, the kind you'd find on a grandma's porch. "Sit with me a minute?" She sat, knees pressed together, fingers twisting the strap of her purse. He lowered himself beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I've been doing this for years," he said, voice low. "Cities start to look the same. Songs start to feel like noise. But last night reminded me why I ever picked up that guitar in the first place." Emily swallowed. "Because of Willow Creek." He smiled. "Because of people like you." She wanted to say something, anything, but her tongue was tied in knots. She settled for a shy laugh that made Jackson's eyes crinkle at the corners. "You got any plans tonight?" he asked suddenly. She blinked. "Tonight? Yeah. Thought maybe you'd keep me company for a bit. Talk about old times. About this place." Emily's heart skipped. "Why me?" she whispered again. Jackson leaned back, propped his boots on the edge of an old crate. "Maybe I just want to remember where I came from. And maybe you're the only one who makes this place feel like home." And just like that, Emily Carter, the girl from the third row, felt the entire world shift beneath her feet. It was dusk by the time Emily found herself sitting in the passenger seat of Jackson Hayes's old Ford pickup, the one he'd driven back when he was just a kid with big dreams and a bigger guitar case. He'd kept it all these years, a piece of home on 4 battered wheels that still smelled faintly of motor oil and pine. The leather seat beneath her was cracked and warm from the day's sun. Her fingers brushed the worn dashboard, tracing the initials JH carved into the glove box. She glanced at Jackson, who was drumming his thumbs on the steering wheel, his eyes squinting at the endless stretch of country road ahead. "You never traded it in?" she asked, breaking the quiet. Jackson shot her a grin, the kind that made her stomach flip. "Hell no. This truck's been with me longer than any record deal. Besides," he added, flicking his eyes to her, "I got a lot of good memories in this old thing." Emily's cheeks flushed, mind instantly imagining all the girls who'd probably sat where she was now. Pretty faces and bright lipstick, leaving traces of perfume and maybe even heartbreak behind. "Don't look so serious, darling," Jackson teased, catching her expression. "You're the only one tonight." They drove past open fields that shimmered gold under the last rays of sunlight, the warm air whipping through the cracked window, carrying the scent of wildflowers and freshly cut hay. It felt so achingly familiar, yet wildly new. Emily found herself relaxing, leaning her head back, watching the sky deepen into shades of lavender and indigo. They pulled off the road near an old fishing pond hidden by a stand of oak trees. Fireflies blinked lazily above the water, and the air hummed with the steady chorus of crickets. Jackson killed the engine, letting the quiet settle around them like a soft blanket. "You remember this place?" he asked, voice low. Emily stepped out of the truck, her sandals sinking into the cool grass. She turned in a slow circle, memories rising like ghosts from the past. "You used to come here with your guitar, after school." Jackson laughed, closing his door with a gentle thud. "And you used to sneak up behind that old tree stump and spy on me." Emily felt her face flush with warmth. "I did not." He raised a teasing brow. "Darling, I saw your blonde hair sticking out every time." She swatted at his arm, giggling as they made their way to the pond's edge. He spread an old quilt over the ground, pulling his guitar from the back seat like it was an extension of his soul. He patted the spot beside him. "Sit. I want to play you something." Emily sat, tucking her dress around her knees, the damp earth seeping through the blanket. Jackson settled beside her, guitar resting on his thigh, fingers dancing across the strings with a casual grace that made her heart stutter. He strummed a few chords, then looked at her under the brim of his hat. "Been working on something new. Not finished yet." "Can I hear it?" He didn't answer, just started playing, voice sliding in so smoothly that Emily felt it wrap around her like the warm breeze. The song was simple, raw, a melody about coming home and finding something you never knew you'd been missing. Halfway through, he glanced at her, eyes searching. "What do you think?" Emily's throat tightened. "It's beautiful." Jackson set the guitar down, the last note hanging between them like a secret. He reached for her hand, rough fingertips brushing her knuckles. The air shifted, warm and heavy, buzzing with things unsaid. "Emily," he murmured, his voice softer now, "you ever think about leaving this place?" She let out a shaky laugh. "Every day, but it's not that easy." "Why not?" She sighed, staring out at the moon's reflection dancing on the pond. "This town, it's all I know. My mama's here. The diner. It's safe." "Safe don't mean happy," Jackson said, his thumb tracing slow circles over her skin. Emily met his gaze. In the half-light, his eyes looked darker, deeper, like he was carrying every song he'd ever sung right there behind him. "What about you?" she whispered. "Do you ever want to just stop? Not be Jackson Hayes, the superstar, for one night?" He huffed out a laugh. "Every damn day." He let go of her hand long enough to stand and pull her up with him. He led her to the edge of the pond, the water lapping at the worn toes of his boots. Emily's sandals sank into the muddy bank, and she felt small next to him, small but seen, like she was the only thing in the world that made sense right now. Jackson cupped her face, calloused palms warm against her skin. His breath smelled faintly of mint and sweet tea. "I'm tired of everyone wanting something from me," he said, his forehead pressing lightly against hers. "You don't. You never have." Emily's heart rattled in her chest. She was so close, she could count every freckle along his nose, the faint line at the corner of his lips that deepened when he smiled. "I've always just wanted you to be happy," she said. His mouth curved, a hint of a grin. "And what if being happy means standing right here with you?" The words melted the last of her fear. When he kissed her, it was soft at first, like testing the edges of song. He wasn't sure he knew all the words to yet. Then it deepened, warm and insistent, stealing the breath from her lungs and the ground from beneath her feet. She pressed closer, fingers tangling in his hair, the brim of his hat tipping back until it fell into the grass behind him. The pond, the crickets, the fireflies, they were all there, but the world felt narrowed down to the taste of him, the warmth of his mouth, the low rumble of a hum in his throat that told her he'd been waiting for this too. When they finally pulled apart, Emily's lips felt swollen, her head light and spinning. Jackson's smile was crooked and boyish. "You know what I think?" he said. She tilted her head, breathless. "What?" "I think I just wrote the bridge to that song." She laughed, burying her face in his chest as his arms came around her, strong and certain. They stayed by the pond for hours, lying on the quilt under the velvet sky. Jackson talked about life on the road, about empty hotel rooms and fake smiles. Emily told him about the dreams she'd buried, how she used to sing at open mics until people told her to stick to waitressing. "People love to keep you small," Jackson murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns along her arm. "But you're not small, Emily Carter." She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his words sink deep. "What if I'm not brave enough?" Jackson shifted so he could look her in the eyes. "Then let me be brave for you. Just this once." In that quiet clearing by the pond, Emily Carter started to believe that maybe, just maybe, her life could be bigger than Willow Creek's diner booths and whispered dreams. And maybe the boy she'd loved from afar was ready to love her back, right here, under the same stars that watched them both grow up. The next morning, Emily woke up in her childhood bedroom, sunlight sneaking through the thin curtains, warming her face. For a moment, she let herself believe it had all been a dream. The pond, the song, the kiss that still tingled on her lips like a secret promise. But when she rolled over, she saw it. Jackson's old hat, the brim still damp with dew, resting on her nightstand. She sat up, pressing her fingertips to her smile. It was real. He was real. And he'd kissed her like she was more than just a girl in the third row. Her phone buzzed with a message. Town Hall. Noon. Bring your voice. She stared at it, heart thudding. Bring your voice. Did he really mean? Downstairs, her mother, Judy Carter, stood at the kitchen counter, stirring a pot of grits like she had every morning since Emily was 5. Morning, baby, Judy said without looking up. You look like you've seen a ghost. More like I've seen a miracle, Emily said before she could stop herself. Her mama raised an eyebrow. I heard you came home late. Beth says she saw you getting into Jackson Hayes' truck. She turned, pointing the wooden spoon like a sermon. You be careful, Em. Men like that, they're a storm. They come through, shake everything up, and leave you picking up the pieces. Emily bit her lip. What if this one doesn't leave? Judy's eyes softened, the lines around them deepening like old rivers. Then you hold on tight, baby girl. But make sure you don't lose yourself in the holding. An hour later, Emily found herself back at the town hall. The place was half unpacked from the concert. Tangled mic cords, empty soda cans, amps stacked like makeshift fortresses. Jackson stood on stage, guitar in hand, his back to her as he tuned the strings with the same quiet reverence he'd had at 17. She watched him for a moment, her nerves bubbling up in her chest like champagne fizz. He turned, spotting her in the doorway, and that slow, crooked smile of his undid her completely. Hey there, Songbird, he said, hopping down from the stage. Songbird, she teased, hugging herself to keep from trembling. He shrugged, brushing a curl behind her ear. Thought it suited you. They spent the afternoon sprawled across the creaky stage, scribbling lyrics on scraps of paper, testing chords, laughing when a line didn't quite fit. Jackson's energy was electric. Each note he played felt like an unspoken promise that this, right here, was exactly where he wanted to be. But as the sun dipped lower, a knock at the back door rattled the hall. Jackson's manager, a sharp-eyed man named Reed, stepped inside. He took in the scene. The mess of napkins, Emily's flushed cheeks, Jackson's easy grin with a frown. Jackson, Reed said, voice tight. We need to talk. Jackson's jaw tensed, but he kept his smile for Emily. Be right back, darling. She watched him disappear behind the heavy curtain, voices muffled but tense. She could catch bits and pieces. She's not part of the plan. Not just some fan, Reed. Your label won't stand for it. Emily's stomach twisted. She knew this moment would come, the line between dream and reality blurring until one of them had to bend. She slipped off the stage, hugging her arms around herself, staring at the poster from last night still pinned to the bulletin board. Jackson Hayes. One night only. One night only. When Jackson returned, his face was careful, his shoulders a little heavier. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles the same way it had by the pond. Em, come with me tonight. I want you to sing with me. The new song. She stared at him, wide-eyed. In front of everyone? I can't. I'm not. He stepped closer, cupping her face so she had no choice but to meet his eyes. Emily Carter, you sang to me long before I ever sang to a crowd. You gave me every reason to pick up that guitar again. Don't you dare stand there and tell me you can't. Her breath hitched. But what about Nashville? Your tour? The label? Let me worry about that. All I want tonight is you. Your voice. Our song. And in that small town hall, dust motes swirling like fireflies in the fading light. Emily said yes. When dusk fell, the Willow Creek Tavern buzzed like a beehive. Word had gotten out. Jackson Hayes was playing one last secret set before leaving town, and he was bringing someone special on stage. Emily sat backstage, hands trembling in her lap. She could hear the crowd, the chatter and laughter, the clinking of beer bottles and the creak of old bar stools. Jackson knelt in front of her, his hands warm on her knees. "Look at me," he said softly. She did. "You're not that girl stuck behind a counter anymore. Not tonight." She nodded, a wobbly smile breaking through the fear. "Not tonight." When they stepped out, the place erupted, people stomping boots on the worn wooden floor, clapping, whistling. Jackson tipped his hat, the same one she'd found by her bed that morning. "This here's Emily Carter," he drawled into the mic, his voice echoing off the walls lined with old neon signs and faded photos. "She's got a voice y'all need to hear." He turned, eyes locked on hers. "Ready?" Emily's heart hammered, so hard she thought it might burst. But when the first chord rang out, that soft, familiar melody they'd stitched together from old dreams, her fear melted into the smoke curling from the stage lights. She sang. At first, her voice trembled like a leaf caught in a breeze. But then she found the note, the truth tucked deep in her chest, and let it pour out like honey. The crowd hushed, leaning in, hearing the girl who'd spent years singing to herself behind diner counters and cracked bathroom mirrors. When their harmonies wove together, Emily felt it. The bridge to something bigger than Willow Creek, bigger than fear. For the first time in her life, she felt seen. Not as Jackson Hayes' biggest fan, not as the small-town waitress, but as Emily Carter, the woman with a voice too strong to stay hidden. As the last note faded, the bar thundered with applause. Jackson leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers, their laughter mingling in the warm, electric hum of the moment. "You did it, Songbird," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "You did it." She kissed him right there on stage, soft, sure, sweet as the promise of every sunrise yet to come. The whole town hooped and hollered, but to Emily, the world had narrowed down to him, her, and the music they'd made together. Weeks later, a new single dropped on every country radio station from Nashville to L.A. "The Girl in the Third Row." Jackson and Emily sang it together, their voices twined like a thread pulling two separate stories into one. They didn't have it all figured out. The road ahead was wild and uncertain. There would be late nights, long miles, critics who'd doubt her, storms that would test every vow whispered in the dark. But as they drove away from Willow Creek in that battered Ford truck, her hand resting on his thigh, his hat on her head, the radio playing their song, Emily knew she'd never look back and wonder what if. Because once upon a small-town night, her idol saw her, really saw her. And together, they wrote a love song the world would never forget. Moral of the story: sometimes the dreams you whisper in the dark find you when you least expect it. And sometimes, the one you've always loved sees you for exactly who you are, giving you the courage to become who you were meant to be. Sparkles, keep dreaming, keep singing. And remember, the third row is just the beginning. Sparkles.